Today we have a special episode of the Butterfly Effect because with me and Tal, we're joined by Mr. Bill Still, and Mr. Still is a best-selling author and also an award-winning documentary filmmaker. He created films that you might know. One of them, the first one is called The Money Masters.
In 96.
96. Then we have The Secret of Oz.
Which won Best Documentary in 2010 at one film festival.
And the one that is just out now, if we can even show this, it's called Jackal Island. And all of Bill's films are actually focused on what is happening really in the world in the monetary realm. And what are the problems that we see or don't see, and where are we headed and how can we fix it? Fair to say that about 100 million people worldwide have watched your films. You're also a published author in newspapers, and you're a newspaper editor yourself. You've written in papers such as USA Today and LA Times and Omni Magazine and others. And how are you doing?
I'm enjoying Israel for the first time. I've never been here before, and it's a pleasure to be here. Being from a Christian community, you know, Israel is always a place that everybody wants to come, and so this is my time.
Nice. Okay, great. So why don't we start with just hearing from you about what's in those films for those who haven't seen or just heard of them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I was editing a newspaper, I got onto this story. But it didn't make sense to me. It took me 12 years to actually write a book. I kept coming back to it. When you're running a newspaper, really the only time you have to read books or think is between Christmas and New Year's. So you have that 1 week period, and where do you put your time there? So I'd always come back to the story because it didn't make sense to me. And it took me about 12 years before I published my first book in 1992, and then followed it with The Money Masters in 96. And basically, I try to help people to understand that this is not rocket science. The problem with not only Israel's economy, but the American economy and the economy of every nation on earth is basically the same. We're drowning in debt, both personally and governmentally. But we're never going to get out of this until we cure the governmental problem first. I believe that the most important thing that we can do to get out of this problem is to eliminate the ability of a nation-state to borrow money. Why would a nation-state borrow when a nation-state can create? It's the most awesome responsibility of a nation to be able to create its money and control the quantity of that money. Secondly, you have to eliminate the ability of banks to essentially counterfeit the national money, which is what they're doing through something called fractional reserve lending. When you go and get a mortgage, a loan from a bank, they don't go into the back room and pull out a pile of money and give it to you. No, they actually just give it to you in electronic digits off of a computer keyboard. They don't actually have the money. They somehow, by bribing politicians or whatever down through the years, have gotten this monopoly power to just create money out of nothing. And that's what the problem is today. So that's why, in fact, it's so important that the first step is to eliminate the ability of the national government to borrow money, because primarily they borrow from the banks. Yes, there's a lot of savings bonds and all that, but primarily governments issue bonds into the open marketplace, and those bonds are bought primarily by banks and central banks, domestic and foreign. And so therefore, there is this corrosive effect where the banks eventually control the government. In the United States, this effect was noted as early as 1896 with William Jennings Bryan, with the most famous political speech ever given at a political convention. It was called the Cross of Gold speech, in which Bryan said that it's not that the government should get out of the banking business, it's that the banks should get out of the governing business. And that is the essential problem. We have lost our ability for self-governance because our governments are borrowing from banks. That's the first step until you cure that step, or at least make all politicians aware that this is the basic problem, you are never going to get effective legislation to fix the other problem, namely that banks get to counterfeit money by creating it out of nothing. The way the situation is now is banks lend to the government. The way the situation should be is reversed. The government creates the money, lends it to the banks at, let's say, 1%, then the banks lend it out to us at 2, 3, 4%, and they compete to give us the best deal. That competition would be healthy competition and would keep things at the lowest prices for we, the public. But since we have the reverse situation, that's not a good thing, and that has to be cured.
Maybe just a few minutes of basic education for just to make sure that all our viewers are on the same page and understanding what we're talking about. So the bankers, the public officials, what's the current relationship and exactly how does it work? Because if you ask people who are not necessarily experts in economics, most people, they wouldn't know exactly how our money is created, where does it go, and what it's created from. So give us the explanation in a short form, if possible.
That's what I do. That's what I try to do. Unfortunately, the situation we're in today is that most money is not created by the government. If you go out on the street or you ask the average person out there in your audience, who creates the money? They're going to naturally say, well, the government creates the money. They say that not because it's the truth, but because they know intuitively that that's the way it should be. Government should be creating the money for the equal benefit of all citizens. But that's not the way it is. I don't know when this changed in Israel, but it changed at different times in different nations, and virtually all nations now are under this debt money system, where the government only creates a very small percentage of the money. In the United States, all the government actually creates are the coins. All the dollar bills and the electronic money are all created by the banks. And that's the wrong situation. The government should create all the money and spend it into existence and lend it to the banks to relend to us.
So why is this actually happening? Because it seems irrational. I mean, we see where it's headed. We're seeing what's happening. That it's like you said, we're making money out of air, and it's a big bubble that has burst and it's just continuing on to disintegrate. So why? Aren't people at the top smart enough to see what's happening to change it? Why do you think it's not changing?
Well, I think there's a couple factors. First of all, why don't we know about this, which I think we should talk about, and that is that there are three major sources of truth in any society, and that's the media, the academic community, the professors, and the politicians. Well, we all know, and as I just explained, the politicians are heavily influenced by the bankers at this point, because the government is borrowing from the banks. I mean, even Napoleon said it, the hand that gives is above the hand that receives. This has been known throughout history. So the politicians have essentially been corrupted. That doesn't mean that they're all on the take. Legislation is just kind of steered around certain areas. It's rather subtle, but in the academic community in the United States, it's not so subtle at all, or even in Western Europe. I have professors in the video who say that the academic community, starting about in 1970, there was a concept of tenure that used to protect professors from being fired for their political opinions. That worked very well until about the 1970s in the United States, when the Federal Reserve System embarked on a program of providing visiting professorships, giving them money, and there are only about 1,000 professors of monetary science in the United States. So they found out it was not that difficult to shovel them a little money here and a little money there, and they gradually learned we have to maintain the Federal Reserve line or else we're not going to get this money. And if it means a new car every year, that's kind of significant to a professor who's not used to the highest salary that they could possibly get. So the academic community has, also the journals. There are only 9 large, non-significant economics journals in the United States. And all of the managing board of those journals are heavily influenced by people who either work currently for the Federal Reserve or have in the past or want to in the future. And so as Professor Richard Werner in my film from the University of Southampton in the UK states, these people have been completely co-opted at this point, where you have to either do research that the journals will print, and the journals will only print stuff that this debt money system approves of, or we can no longer have you at the university. And as he says, it's very shocking. And as he also says, as far as the creation of this debt, why would the government issue bonds to create money? Why would you borrow from a bank at interest the basic money for all of the people of your economy when you can just create it like people know intuitively should be done? The third problem is the media problem, and that's probably why you all are in existence, because you sense here in Israel that the traditional media is not telling the full story. So you sense that there's a place for you to tell an alternate view, and that's absolutely true. And the way that's done in the United States is also rather subtle. I know for a fact, because I know one of the presidents of 3 major networks in the United States, that this is done through lending. There's an old maxim in the banking community, and that's people will accept any loan offered. And so if a big bank comes in to a TV station and says, you know, we can buy you all new cameras and a brand new studio and a truck to go out and do your stories, and you'll look much better than these other networks. Of course, they'll say, great, we'll take it. Anyone will take any loan offered. And when you're in a competitive environment, such as the cutthroat environment in the United States media, well, then they go to the next the competitor, and they say, you know, this other guy, he just took a loan from us, he's upgrading his equipment, you'd better do the same thing. And pretty soon you get in an environment where they will borrow up to the maximum extent that they can, to the point where now the major networks in the U.S. cannot even pay the interest on their loans. They require that those loans be rolled over each time, and that gives the lender, in this case, J.P. Morgan is the one that is the major lender to these networks, tremendous power over the networks. It's a subtle power. It's not that Morgan gets on the phone every day and approves every story, but the managing editors, the producers, they all know, well, maybe we'd better not do that story, you know, against the banks, because J.P. Morgan, you know, might not give us that loan. So it's a subtle influence, but a significant influence. And when you combine the fact that the media, the politicians, and now even the academic community have all been corrupted by this power, it makes it very difficult for the average person to get the truth. And if I get any message through to the people of Israel here, we're doing conferences for the next few days in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa.
Yeah, you were just in the Knesset as well, right?
I was in the Knesset yesterday. But before we talk about that, if I can get any message through to the people of Israel, this is not rocket science. This is easy. It's just common sense stuff. Your government should not be allowed to borrow, ever, ever, ever. Why would a government borrow when a government can create? Number 2, you have to eliminate the ability of banks to create money out of nothing. That's called full reserve lending. It's nothing new. This is not a radical experiment. It's the way things used to be. Just gradually over the last century, this has all changed into the system we have now, where everything is built on a pyramid of debt that absolutely has to go on with ever-increasing debt to sustain itself until the entire thing collapses. We are absolutely on a one-way ticket to economic hell until we fix this problem. And the way we fix it are those 2 simple steps. Any person can understand this, and encourage your politicians to fix it the right way.
Okay, so an important thing I think to understand is, why are we on our way to economic hell? Why does it have to happen? Does the current system, we understand that there's corruption, we understand that politics, media, academia, they're all in one way or another controlled. And so why is it destined to collapse?
Because these banks are corporations, and there's not just one of them. They compete. And we found out as a result of the 2008 congressional hearings in the United States after the crash that the head of Citibank, he was asked, why did you participate in this? It's nothing but illegality. And he, you know, kind of sheepishly admitted, when the music is playing, you have to get up and dance. And what that means is that when you're in an environment of ever-increasing illegality, to squeeze that extra dollar to make your numbers look good, make the numbers of Citigroup look good against the numbers of J.P. Morgan, it's a competition, and it's a competition of how to just squeeze the economy one more bit, and there's going to be no end to it. It's a system built on debt that absolutely must encourage increasing levels of debt. And so it can only go on for so long. Some of the brightest economists in the United States now realize that we've reached a point for the first time in human history called debt saturation, where this increasing level of debt no longer increases GDP. It's now starting to suppress GDP. So really they have no way out. They're in the debt money box and they don't know what to do. They only have two options, and that's austerity measures, which you're seeing in Israel. That's what was being debated yesterday in the Knesset, or increasing money printing or raising taxes. Neither of these is going to work. They're absolutely doomed to failure until people understand that there is another way to do this. You can get out of the debt money system and just move to government-issued debt-free money. And that changes the whole thing. It turns it upside down on its head and democratizes the power structure instead of this increasingly steep power structure.
It seems like we've become so used to this way of life that we, like you said, we don't even question it because we think that's the way it has to be. And you're saying that there are alternatives. But my question is, if we've already become so accustomed to this culture of competition, this culture of trying to get my own profit, even if it's at the expense of others, even if it's the expense of the whole system, is that something that could change from a monetary change, or is that something that we all need to change? I know, for example, Ken Robinson talks about our educational systems being based on the same competitive attitude where we compete for grades, for numbers. We want to get the highest grade in the class. I mean, there's a kind of mentality that we see that's pervasive, and it's not just in the economy, it's really everywhere we look. And my question is, if we're so used to that, would changing our monetary system be enough for us to change ourselves?
Well, I don't know about that, but the problem is that there's a much more basic attribute of civilization on the line, and that's, are humans capable of self-governance? That's how humankind escaped serfdom in the first place. And without effective self-governance, that's where humankind is destined to return. And we already see that. So I think self-governance is more the question. And if we can claw back the power of self-governance, broaden that power pyramid to where the people on the bottom feel closer to the people in power, that's what self-governance is. If we can claw that back, then at least things will be much, much better. At least things will begin to stimulate a thriving middle class once again, when right now we're just squeezing the life out of the middle class and squeezing everybody down into the lowest part of the pyramid, and nothing good can come from this.
You explained how the people on the top that are controlling the money and controlling everything, basically, are competing between themselves. The same competitive and cutthroat mentality ripples through the system, and we see basically the effects of it on every level. The educational system that Tal brought up, and what happened to our academics and the media, and the kind of values that the media promotes as well. Do you think that all of these will have to be changed afterwards as well, that the monetary reform will have to be coupled as well with something that will drive a value shift in order to prevent the same situation from happening, or a monetary reform will?
I only deal with monetary reform. I mean, you're talking about something post-monetary reform. I'm happy to have monetary reform take place.
So that itself, you say, will already
That's going to democratize the system to a significant extent. You know, William Jennings Bryan, another thing he said in that Cross of Gold speech in 1896 was, until monetary reform takes place, no other true reform is possible. And that's absolutely true, because the money system is at the core, at the base of every other thing. So I'm quite happy just to be a proponent for monetary reform, and then folks of your generation can figure out the rest.
Yeah, because, you know, it feels to me like the average person is kind of it's kind of weak in the face of all this power, and I mean, we like to take credit, as I like to have credit. I like to have the ability to get things I want. I'm so surrounded by the media and people around me who are living in this way that I want to do that too. I want to be just like everybody else. And so what I'm wondering is, how could I feel that I have power too, that I'm not a slave to a system, that I can make changes in my life. How can we give more power to the people? What can we tell our viewers today so they'll feel that they're not a little, you know, just a tiny piece of the puzzle, but they too have the power to change something?
Well, they feel that they're not in control of their government anymore, because they're not. The banks have a tremendous control over governance right now, because governments borrow from the banks. And so, as I've made this little power pyramid model, the power pyramid now is very steep, and it's steepening more and more every year. That puts the average person way far away from the people who are the decision makers. And everybody feels that intuitively. They feel that they no longer really can influence their parliamentarian, that he's much farther away, and he is. That's the problem. So we have to re-democratize self-governance. And the answer is not to give up on government. I just want to stress that. Government is all we've got. It's just out of our control right now. We have to take that control of self-governance back, or there's absolutely no hope. There are only two things that can happen here. You either have the rule of law, or you have the law of the jungle. Now, there's nobody out there in your television viewing audience, I guarantee you, that if they understood this, would vote for the law of the jungle. Everybody wants civilization, stability, and the rule of law. And in order to have that, you have to empower effective self-governance.
I think also they'd like to have trust in their government. I think that's something.
Do you trust yourself? Would you trust yourself to be in Parliament?
I don't know.
You would. I know you would. We just talked about that, and so would you.
Maybe if I had a lot of friends to watch out for me.
Yeah, something like that. Actually, it's a critical point. I mean, what Bill said about how people naturally, intuitively today feel that you can't trust your government. Right. They don't know why, maybe.
Well, I met with parliamentarians just yesterday. I met with Mr. Braverman, who's head of the Economic Committee. I met your secretary, the equivalent of your Secretary of Treasury. Mr. Braverman is a very well-intentioned guy who knows there's something wrong with this system, and he is determined to get at the core of it. And he spoke to me very heart to heart in the lunchroom of the Knesset yesterday. And I think we can have a significant relationship with him in the future.
And you think that if one country will change, that...
Oh, absolutely. That's such a key point. We're reaching a tipping point in human history here. Everyone, I travel around the world, and there's people just like you folks in every country. We all know something's wrong. We all know we've lost control of our government. We know somehow the monetary system has something to do with it, but we don't know exactly what to do. We're going to reach a tipping point, which in political science is nothing happens, boom. All of a sudden it happens really fast, and everybody goes, oh, we knew that all along.
Right.
But they wouldn't admit that beforehand. The example is the perfect example is the Berlin Wall. It looked like it wasn't going to happen, boom, in 1 week it was gone. You just have to focus people on the basic, simple stuff that needs to be done. If we all moved in the same direction, we could get this done in no time at all.
That's interesting. If we all move in the same direction. So how do we get people to move in the same direction? I think that's a good question.
That's why I'm here. That's why I make films. That's why I encourage people to know that you can get this. You can fix it. You can understand it. Your politicians will listen to the simple truth.
Okay, I think since we have 2 minutes left, I'd like to, you mentioned your films, and I'd like to, once again to just show Jekyll Island. This is your latest film, just out. tell us a little bit about what's the unique addition in this film on top of your other
I made it
films.
just because of the 1907 crash in the United States, when J.P. Morgan and the Rockefeller family deliberately caused a depression in the United States, or a crash in the New York stock market, to deliberately drive out some of their competitors. The Knickerbocker Bank, owned by the Heinz Group, is what they were after. But the depression spread throughout the whole country. The panic spread. It caused this big depression, but people back in those days were much more aware of what was going on. They knew the bankers had done this. Why? Because they had an honest press and an honest academic community and some honest politicians. We don't have that today. So they knew much more what was going on. They got mad. They wanted to change it. Congress was determined to change it. And so the bankers gathered together on this secret train, went down to this little remote island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island. They met. They knew there was going to be legislation to fix this problem. So what they did was write the legislation. That's what they did. And then they put it back into the system. They had to keep it secret. If it got out that the bankers had written the legislation, it wouldn't pass. That's eventually what passed in 1913 with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. And so
from that moment basically until today, the Federal Reserve is
we've been under this
money.
Consolidated debt money system that's got to go, because it's strangling the life out of every economy on this planet.
Well, I gotta say, we're just before we have to conclude, I gotta say what I've learned, other than the really why there's a need for monetary reform, is that this kind of awareness will spread, first of all. That people need to understand, to be more active, at least in knowing, in not just being fed by conventional stories from media and so forth, but to really understand what's going on. What's URL that we can give to our viewers right now?
Sure, it's jekyll-island-themovie.com, and Jekyll is with two L's, Jekyll.
Okay, so jekyll-island-themovie.com is where you can find the latest film from Bill. I want to thank you very much, Bill, and thank you, Tal. Thanks to our viewers. We'll see you next time.